Today we're going to go over the signs and symptoms of measles, definitely what to look out for. And again, as you know, there is only one real treatment for measles, which is preventative, and that is the MMR vaccine. So I'm just going to say that up front, no surprises. But for those of you who still have questions, and you should, because I'm going to be honest, we really, it was eradicated in 2000. So even in medical school, we didn't know what a lot of these things looked like, and except in books. And unfortunately, now we're seeing them in real time. So yay. All right. So first off, signs and symptoms. So one of the things that I do want to talk about is that it takes so long for measles, like after you're exposed, for you to develop signs and symptoms. So that's why a lot of people are really freaking out about this. Because in most cases, right, you'll see somebody one day, then maybe like 2-3 days later, maybe even in the next day, they'll start coming down with those symptoms. The reason why measles is really so tricky is because it can be 7 days all the way up to 2 weeks after you've been exposed to somebody who may be infected for you to develop symptoms. So it's even more dangerous, and it will spread further, right, and infect more people, because think of all the people that you come into contact with in a week. Imagine 2 weeks. So you're out there talking, walking, doing everything around, and you're essentially spreading measles without having any symptoms. Then you develop them. So symptoms develop anywhere from 7 days to 14 days after exposure. Now, the first signs and symptoms of measles are fever, cough, runny nose, and red watery eyes, okay, which we call in conjunctivitis. But essentially, the reason why it is so crazy is because there are a bunch of other diseases that look similar, right? A lot of people come into my office with a high fever, a cough, a runny nose, even red watery eyes. We see viruses like this. So this is why it is also especially tricky. However, the fever it'd be pretty high. So it could be in some cases 104, 105. It could be a higher fever, even 103. So those are things to look for. But again, I'm going to say it again. Fever, high fever though, cough, runny nose, and watery eyes, and more red eyes as well, or conjunctivitis. Those will be the initial symptoms. Okay, guys, so day 2 to 3 of symptoms, after you've gotten the fever, the cough, the runny nose, and the kind of reddish eyes, so that's really day 1. Day 2 to 3, now you also start developing Koplik spots. These are little white pinpoint spots that are on the internal part of the cheek, so what we call the buccal mucosa. So if you kind of open your mouth, it's the inner part of the cheek there where you'll see little pinpoint spots. So good to know. If you see it, absolutely say something and let your medical professional know. Okay, now we're on day 3 to 5 of the measles. So essentially, this is when the rash begins. It's normally seen to be like flat red spots as well, and they'll start appearing on the face. And again, when we talk about the distribution or like the direction of the rash, it essentially goes from the face and works its way down the body, okay? And then goes to the neck, trunk, arms, all those things. But essentially, if you're talking about the directionality, it starts off at the head and then works its way down the body. You also, the rash also may change in the sense that it may start being more like small red bumps that are flat, but then may start to become more bumpy or raised as time goes on as well. And then the fever still can continue. So I do want you to know, in terms of the timing, when we talk about this fever, cough, runny nose, right? Red, watery eyes, that's day 1. Day 2, you may start noticing those coplik spots on the internal portion of the cheeks, but then also take into account this is only adding to the symptoms. Then day 3 to 5, you'll start getting a red rash that will go from the head all the way down the body as the days go on. And then you'll also notice a continued fever. In some cases, you may even notice that the fever gets even higher, 104, 105. And again, this goes back to some of our videos that we've talked about with fever in the past. This categorizes a high fever. This is a high fever. Okay, so we've talked about signs and symptoms. Now I'm going to talk about complications and why we as medical professionals really just, shudder when we hear measles. All right, so first, your general complications are ear infections and diarrhea, which we know are not fun. That happens in about 1 out of every 10 cases. In terms of hospitalizations, though, if we start talking about more of the severe cases, so about 1 in 5 kids need to be hospitalized who have measles. Now, if you're talking about a small number of kids, not a big deal. But when you're dealing with a large population of children, think about that. Then you're now talking about overrunning the hospitals and kids needing care based on their level of illness. And kids get really sick when they get the measles. So now we talk about pneumonia. So in terms of pneumonia, it affects about 1 in 20 cases of kids that get the measles. And if you can believe it, it is the most common cause of death for kids who get infected with the measles. To add to that, this is one of the big ones. 1 in 1,000 cases will have kids who get an encephalitis. It is a complication that results in swelling of the brain. This leads to convulsions, but the thing is that it can eventually lead to death. If your child does not die if they get encephalitis, they can get severe neurological impairment for the rest of their lives, and they can also be deaf as well. So again, they're lucky if they survive the encephalitis. It is rare, but it is a complication that you really don't ever want to have the opportunity to have. So, and then again, right? Again, I mentioned it before, but death is the most severe complication of measles. And I'm going to say that because, again, we don't like to think of kids and death being in the same sentence. But when it comes to measles, this is really where we have to talk about it and be honest about it. So I hope this helps. I hope this kind of points out why, like I said, as medical professionals, we had been pushing for the MMR vaccine so strongly because it is so tricky. And it was such an achievement to have it being eradicated in 2000. It really was. Think about it. It is a disease that is hard to detect. Once you get it, bam, it hits, and there's just a succession of symptoms, and it has severe complications in some cases. So it really was an amazing thing to have it eradicated. That being said, I ask that everybody does their part if they can. Now, I know that there are some kids who are immunocompromised. There are other people who can't necessarily get the vaccine, but if you can get the MMR vaccine and you haven't already and you are due for it, please get it. I cannot state that more strongly. All right, guys. For more tips and tricks, please go to our website, www.askpeds.com. You can check us out on TikTok and also on YouTube. and feel free to subscribe. We will continue doing videos like this, similar to, hopefully we won't have to keep doing them about epidemics and other illnesses that are spreading around the country. I'm hoping, but again, one of the concerns that we have is that a lot of our systems that we had in place are kind of dissolving. I mean, before, even as a medical professional, I could just type into the CDC and I had people who are monitoring epidemics and relaying things back to me on how the spread was, who's being affected, what states were being affected, how badly it was. Some of that is gone now. So I can't even do that. And as a frontline worker, meaning people come into my office and I am essentially seeing them and having to figure this out on my feet just like that. And then as an office, we have to kind of quarantine or do whatever we need to accordingly to keep our patients safe, treat them effectively, but again, keep that larger community safe. So please take that into account. Know that there are other kids, like I said, who are immunocompromised. There are babies who cannot get vaccinated. There are people who rely on you and your family to get vaccinated. And I know it seems like such a bummer and it's so annoying, but it really is a great service to you, your children, and your larger community. So please help us. Please keep us safe. Okay, guys, take care. Bye.